This webinar is part of the 6NR technical webinar series. As Annie just mentioned, I am Martin Cadena, technical specialist for the 6NR project and your facilitator for this webinar. I warmly welcome you all to this webinar session. This webinar features presentations from UN Biodiversity Lab team. Today we will have with us Christina Soppels, the UNDP 6NR project manager, Annie Vernick, UNDP coordinator for the UN Biodiversity Lab, Scott Atkinson, UNDP special planner for the 6NR project, and Daniel Perez, UNDP website specialist. This 2-hour webinar will provide the countries in your region with a virtual orientation to the UN Biodiversity Lab. You will learn how the UN Biodiversity Lab can be used to support preparation of a data-driven 6NR. You will receive an overview of how to analyze your country's national and global geospatial data to make assessments about progress to achieve several Aichi Biodiversity Targets, implement your NBSAP, and achieve expected conservation outcomes. You will also have the opportunity to interact with spatial data experts, 6NR specialists, and the UN Biodiversity Lab web development team. Welcome everyone, we are thrilled to have you here today. As usual in our sessions, I would like to remind you certain rules and dynamics in the webinar sessions. The microphones will be mute during this presentation. This reduces the interferences and facilitates the communication. This 2-hour webinar will be divided in 2 sections. The first will discuss how spatial data can support conservation planning and reporting, and we provide you with an introduction to the UN Biodiversity Lab. The second section will introduce you to your country's private workspace on UN Biodiversity Lab and show how this can be used to support your 6NR. Each section of today's webinar will be followed by a 20-30 minutes question and answer session. Please send us in advance your questions or raise your hand in the control panel of GoToWebinar. If you want to speak and the connection allows it, we will open your microphones during the Q&A session. The webinar is being entirely recorded and will be posted on the NBSAP Forum YouTube channel. We will also share the recording via email. Now we'll transfer the webinar to our first presenter, Christina Soppels, UNDP 6NR project manager, who will provide an introduction to the importance of the spatial data for conservation planning and reporting. Over to you, Chrissy.
Great, thank you so much, Martin. Thanks for the introduction. It's a pleasure to spend my evening with you all. I wanted to start with a brief introduction to the UN Biodiversity Lab and the importance of data for nature and development decision making. Next slide, please. We're in a world awash with data. 90% of the data of all of human history was generated within the last 2 years, and that pace of data is continuing to grow exponentially, as you all know. We have satellite imagery for every corner of the Earth at 3-meter resolution on a daily basis. Scientists have mapped every single tree in 5 Amazon countries. Yet, despite all of this information, the 4th Industrial Revolution has yet to make a serious mark on the field of biodiversity, and in particular on the intersection of ecosystem services and human development. Last year, our team at UNDP analyzed the maps of every post-2020 NBSAP and 5th National Report, and the findings were quite startling. While we knew that there wasn't a lot of spatial data showing up in these documents, we found that the average number of maps in the 5th National Reports was fewer than 5 per country, and the average number of NBSAPs contained less than 4 maps. These numbers included a map of the country itself. Roughly a third of NBSAPs had absolutely no maps at all. Furthermore, 80% of all national reports and 70% of all NBSAPs did not have maps that provided information to guide biodiversity decision making. And also less than 4% of maps focused on essential ecosystem services. This only took place in a handful of countries. This December, we surveyed more than 70 GEF eligible countries, and the findings confirmed what we suspected. 4 out of every 5 parties that we spoke with identified that they had some specific data analysis and gathering problems. These included things like silos between agencies, a lack of access to global, regional, and national and local data sets, challenges accessing and using specialized software, and limited server capacity. And this is not only unfortunate, it's also dangerous for the future of biodiversity, and here's why. As you all know, nature underpins our ability to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. If we don't know where our natural capital is and what it does for our well-being, communities, and livelihoods, then we have little hope of tackling the development and climate challenges of the coming decades. I'm going to start by giving you 3 examples. First, nature is essential to the livelihoods of 80% of the people on our planet who live on less than $10 a day. Agriculture sustains 1.3 billion livelihoods, forests sustain another 1.6 billion livelihoods, and oceans sustain another 1.6 billion livelihoods. Therefore, 2 out of every 3 people on this planet are directly dependent on nature for their livelihoods. We also know from the Global Land Outlook that 1.3 billion people rely on degraded agricultural land, and at least 1/5 of all the cropland globally is degraded, mostly in developing countries. With this information in mind, the challenge for us as a conservation and development community is to answer the question, where are the opportunities to tackle poverty through regenerative agriculture and land restoration? For the second example, let's look at how nature is essential to water security. 3 out of every 4 of the people on the planet are dependent on forests for their drinking water. Yet we know from a recent WRI report that in 2017 was the 2nd worst year for forest loss on record. We also know that 50% of global forest cover has been cleared or degraded. So we have a problem. These types of activities raise the risk of the kind of drought that we're starting to see in cities around the world, with estimates of day 0 for water. On a positive note, a recent study from the Nature Conservancy found that more than 3,200 cities around the world could significantly improve their water security through forest restoration. The spatial challenge for us is to determine where we should focus restoration efforts to improve water security. For the third example, I want us to think about how nature is essential to addressing climate change. We know from recent scientific studies that forests represent close to 40% of our climate mitigation solutions. But we will not be able to come close to achieving our 2% goal, our 2-degree goal, let alone our 1.5-degree goal without forest. To achieve this goal, as conservation managers, we have to be able to ask the question, where exactly are the forests with high carbon stocks? How do they relate to existing forest concessions and forest protected areas? And where should we be taking specific forest action to have the biggest climate impact? To answer the questions raised in these 3 examples, we need spatial data. Data on land cover, protected areas, carbon stocks, hydrosheds, and poverty for a start. And to make more informed policy decisions on nature and development, we also need to analyze the results of intersecting multiple data sets. Next slide, please. Through our work with the 6 National Report Project, we're finding powerful examples of how GEF-eligible countries are using geospatial data to make more informed conservation decisions that are advancing NBSAP implementation and helping to facilitate the delivery of the Aichi Biodiversity Targets and the achievement of the CBD's strategic plan. I want to shift to sharing a few stories of these achievements with you. Traveling around the world, let's first go to North America. In Mexico, the government is using spatial data to help implement COP13 decisions on how to mainstream biodiversity into the agricultural sector. Here, spatial data are providing key information to align policies on agricultural incentives with the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. These data are helping the government of Mexico to achieve Aichi Biodiversity Target 3. Next, to the south in Ecuador, the government is using spatial data to tailor the extent and footprint of the protected area system to reflect ecosystem fragility and biodiversity. These data are being used to demonstrate to the government the important contributions that are being made to Aichi Biodiversity Target 15. Across the Atlantic, the South African government is using spatial data to select potential areas for the official designation of marine protected area. This work is contributing to Aichi Biodiversity Target 6, among other targets. And finally, in Eastern Europe, Moldova is using spatial data to ensure the continued success of its Emerald Protected Area network. It's also furthering the capacity of the government to monitor biodiversity and track changes over time. This work contributes to Aichi Biodiversity Target 11 on protected areas. The accomplishments that these parties are making illustrate the powerful role that spatial data can play in supporting the achievement of the Aichi Biodiversity Targets strategic plan and the 2050 vision. In each of these cases, the spatial analyses provided key qualitative and quantitative data to assess the status of NBSAP implementation and also biodiversity status and trends. However, through UNDP and UN Environment's work with 140 countries to prepare their NBSAPs and 6 national reports, we've come to recognize a couple of things. First is that parties' capacity to assess and use spatial data is highly variable. Therefore, we created the UN Biodiversity Lab, which we'll be talking more about today, based on your feedback, to help enable parties to have equal access to high-quality global spatial data and analyses tools, regardless of their internal GIS capacity or their access to data or infrastructure like servers. We see the UN Biodiversity Lab as a key tool to help you produce a high-quality data-driven 6 national report by the end of 2018. And we have a team of spatial ecologists and programmers behind the platform to support you in your work. This is important. As you know, the 6NR must be completed by the end of 2018, and it must be data-driven because these data are used for several things. They're going to be helping us to determine the progress we're making as a global community to achieve the Aichi Biodiversity Targets. They're going to help us improve decision-making related to NBSAP implementation. The data are providing a baseline for the current state of biodiversity around the world. They're informing the 5th Global Biodiversity Outlook, and they're contributing data and guiding discussions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. Accurate data, which geospatial analyses facilitate, are critical to achieving these goals. Just wanted to give you a little bit of information about the UN Biodiversity Lab. Through this project, UNDP and UN Environment are engaging directly with each of you and a total of 140 governments to prepare their 6 national reports. These interactions are allowing us to develop and update the spatial planning platform based on your actual user needs. The platform is managed through a committed partnership between UNDP, UN Environment, with support from the CBD Secretariat and funding from the JEF. Our technical partners include MapX, Grid Geneva, NASA, and UN Environment WCMC. We see this project as just the start of an important opportunity to build partnerships among data providers and data users around the world. Working together will help us all ensure that governments have the access to and the capacity to use cutting-edge spatial data to make important conservation and development decisions. I really appreciate that you've all joined us for this regional orientation webinar today. It's part of a UN Biodiversity Lab training package offered as part of our 6NR technical webinar series. This September, we'll also have 3 in-depth technical trainings, which you can see on the screen, related to uploading and working with national data sets, using spatial data and maps to make decisions, and then using story maps to communicate the value of biodiversity. I mean, they'll be really powerful webinars. So with that, I'm going to conclude the introduction presentation and turn it back over to Martin, and we'll start diving much deeper into the power of the UN Biodiversity Lab to help you with your national reporting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chrissy, for your insightful presentation. In order to learn more about the data, functionalities, and services offered by UN Biodiversity Lab, I would like now to present my colleagues, Anne Bernick, UNDP Coordinator for UN Biodiversity Lab, and Scott Atkinson, UNDP Special Planner for the 6NR. Over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Martin, and thanks to our core group of attendees here tonight. So today, my colleague Scott and I are excited to provide you all with an introduction to the UN Biodiversity Lab, the data we have accessible through the platform, and the types of analyses that you can run to support the preparation of your 6NR and the implementation of your NBSAP. In the first half of this presentation, I'll provide you with an overview of 10 key features of the UN Biodiversity Lab that we feel are particularly important to our 6NR stakeholders. In the second half, my colleague Scott will dive deep into the specific global data sets we have available through the platform, as well as the analyses you can conduct to include in your 6NR. So let me get started. Let's see. There we go. So the mission of the UN Biodiversity Lab is threefold. First, we aim to build spatial literacy to enable better decisions. Second, to use spatial data as a vehicle for improved transparency and accountability. And third, to apply insights from spatial data across sectors to deliver on the Aichi Biodiversity Targets and on the nature-based sustainable development goals. So in order to do this, we offer several key features to the UN Biodiversity Lab. The first feature that I want to emphasize is that UN Biodiversity Lab is a free, open source platform that does not require GIS experience. In our outreach through the 6NR project, we heard from many of you that you don't have the capacity to conduct GIS analyses in your country. On the other hand, some countries told us that they did have GIS capacity in country, but lacked the access to needed server space to analyze their data. We created the UN Biodiversity Lab to address both these issues. On the one hand, the UN Biodiversity Lab facilitates access to key global data layers hosted in the cloud. At the same time, it provides server space for national data to be uploaded and analyzed. I also want to highlight that the platform is designed to be low bandwidth, meaning it can be used in a range of internet connectivity conditions, which we know is important to many of the countries we work with on the 6NR project. The second key feature that I want to highlight is that the platform provides a one-stop shop for policymakers to access the best available spatial data on biodiversity, the protected area state, threats, and the sustainable development goals. We bring together nearly 80 global data layers from over 40 providers that were identified by our spatial data experts as the most essential data to support your 6NR and NBSAP implementation. To access this data is simple. You can see here the home page for UN Biodiversity Lab, which features our data catalog. To explore the data available, you'll need to decide whether you want to view the data globally or by country and select the option from the menu here. You can then also filter by type of data set, by keyword, by theme, or by Aichi Biodiversity Target. In the second half of this presentation, my colleague Scott will explain a little bit more about what data layers we have present here and how they were chosen for inclusion in the site. Another key point to emphasize here is that all data available is carefully curated to enable you to access key data sets by theme or by Aichi Biodiversity Target. In order to do this, our spatial data experts went through and assigned each data set to one or more themes based on its general area of relevance. So for example, our ecoregions data set can be found within the biodiversity theme. Above ground carbon biomass falls within the climate change and carbon theme, and marine wilderness naturally falls within the marine theme. Each data set was also assigned to one or more Aichi biodiversity targets based on either its status as an official indicator for that ABT or our spatial data experts' analysis that it could be useful for reporting on a given ABT. In general, we suggest searching for data by ABT as a good starting point for the 6NR project. However, we encourage you to look beyond just the ABT themes when searching data sets and to explore other thematic areas as well. It's our hope that you'll find novel uses for the data that can assist you in your national reporting. The fourth characteristic that I want to emphasize is that for each of the data layers available on UN Biodiversity Lab, we provide UN verification of data integrity. All data layers included in the platform have been assessed using a dedicated data integrity assessment framework, which scores data reliability, technical accessibility, data openness, and data sustainability. Based on these criteria, each data layer receives a ranking between 0 and 100, which can be viewed in the metadata of each data set. Before any data is made accessible in the UN Verified Data Catalog on the homepage, it's reviewed by our team of experts at UN Environment and UNDP. This ensures that all data in the data catalog has received the UN seal of approval. All right, so the fifth feature is one that we're really excited about. So we've created a secure and private online workspace for each GEF-eligible country working through the 6NR project. On the UN Biodiversity Lab, you'll see this private workspace referred to as your national project. The national project is a secure and private online space that's pre-populated with key peer-reviewed data layers that can support the preparation of your 6NR. We recognize that many countries may have better data available that you prefer to use for your analyses. To facilitate the use of national data, we provide unlimited server space for you to upload your national level spatial data sets. For example, population data, cadastre data, or agricultural data to your national workspace within the UN Biodiversity Lab. For those who don't have national data sets and would like to work with our global data sets available through the platform, we recognize that many countries are required to use only nationally verified data for your 6NR and NBSAPs. If you would like to use the data we have available through UN Biodiversity Lab, but need to ensure that it's nationally verified, we can work with you to facilitate this. Please contact the support email shown on the screen and we can provide a customized letter co-signed by UNDP and UN Environment to contacts within the relevant ministry. Another key feature of the national project is that it has the highest level of privacy assurance as possible. We ensure the privacy of your data in two ways. First, server security, and second, password-protected national projects. So with regards to server security, all data you upload to the site are stored on our secure servers, which are located in Switzerland. Switzerland has the highest standards in the world for data security, so it protects you against any undesired access to your data server side. Secondly, we also protect your data through the national project space. This is a password-protected space within the UN Biodiversity Lab that it has restricted access to only the users you choose through the 6NR project. Access to the national project for your country is regulated by an administrator. For the 6NR project, each UNDP or UN Environment 6NR national focal point has been added as the administrator for your country's national project. Administrators will be able to control who has access to your national project, invite new users, and conduct key analyses to generate maps for inclusion in the 6NR. We'll talk a little bit more about how to access and customize your country's national project in the second hour of this webinar. So the next feature that I'd like to highlight is that you can use UN Biodiversity Lab to conduct key analyses for your 6NR in under 10 minutes. The UN Biodiversity Lab can generate two types of analyses. First, analysis of the status of biodiversity in your country. And second, analyses that identify actions that can be taken to enhance NBSAP implementation and future conservation planning. My colleague Scott will provide some tangible examples of these types of maps in just a little bit here, and we'll also be hosting in-depth webinars on these types of analyses on September 13th and September 18th. Once you've completed these analyses, you can export maps, data layers, and data sets for the 6NR and related analyses at the click of a button. You can see the export formats on the slide, which include several file formats to enable analysis with desktop GIS, as well as PDF exports for maps that can be directly added to your 6NR. All right, number 9. So the 9th feature that I want to highlight is that you can use the UN Biodiversity Lab to share best practices and conservation successes using story maps. The presentation that I'm giving today is based on a story map in UN Biodiversity Lab, and you can see some of the examples that we've put together for countries in the background of this slide. Story maps bring data to life and enable countries to communicate their access to others in high-quality, visually appealing ways. They can be shared on social media, embedded in websites, and even turned into automated videos to, for instance, help stakeholders get funding for future projects, or even to encourage knowledge sharing within your ministry or to communicate to politicians in your country. We'll hold a webinar specifically on creating story maps on September 25th. So finally, I want to highlight that UN Biodiversity Lab is a co-designed space that will be refined based on feedback and requests from our users. The current version of UN Biodiversity Lab is a beta version, and we expect to go through several iterations as we work to include your feedback and to develop new features that better meet your needs. We see this as an ongoing process with you, the users, to figure out what works best to meet your needs in country. So we really highly encourage you to write to the support email shown on the screen with any feedback or any requests for technical support about issues that are ongoing on the platform, or for guidance about how to apply the platform in your national context. Users proficient in informatics can also submit a pull request on GitHub. However, for general inquiries, we suggest sending an email to our support team, who can post it to GitHub if necessary. So with this, I'll turn it over to my colleague Scott to give you a tour of some of the key data layers we offer through UN Biodiversity Lab and the analyses you can conduct to create maps for your 6NR and NBSAP implementation.
All right, thank you, Annie. Good day to everyone joining us today. So we're going to start out by just diving into showing some of the important data we have on the UN Biodiversity Lab. At present, we have around 80 different data layers in UN Biodiversity Lab. Continually adding new data layers all the time. We're working with new partners, and we have our eyes on a few data sets in the next few months that we think will be incredibly important. We select data for inclusion through a process involving input and insight from working conservationists and scientists around the world. And we would like to probably include you as well now. For those of you out there working in this space around the world, please contact us if you have important data you think could actually help countries in their 6NR process. We want to include you in this. All data that UN Biodiversity Lab provides comes from partners who have submitted it and had it published after going through rigorous scientific peer review and publication in some of the world's most high-impact scientific journals, things like Nature and Science, PNAS. We'd be here all day if I were going to go through all the data layers available. So today I'm just going to walk you through some of the most pertinent data layers for the 6NR. We're going to cover data from 4 broad categories: the protected area state, biodiversity, threats, and the Sustainable Development Goals data. Next slide. So let's start out with data on the global protected areas of states. You really can't talk about conservation without mentioning the main tool that policymakers reach for when they talk about conservation, and that's creating protected areas. So let's go through a few of those key PA protected area data layers right now. So the World Database on Protected Areas is the largest database of protected areas on the planet. The data they include are the legally defined protected area boundaries as they're reported to them by governments, both in the marine and the terrestrial areas. And we pulled this data in directly from the World Center for Monitoring and Conservation, WCMC, in Cambridge. So the data that we have in the UN Biodiversity Lab is constantly updated when WDPA releases their updates every month. I know that can be a problem for people working with this sometimes when your data suddenly becomes out of date by a month or two. Next slide, please. We also have data from an analysis that was recently published in Science that provides an estimate of the management effectiveness of protected areas globally. Here, this data represents the percentage of protected areas that are under intense human pressure, deriving human pressure from maps of the human footprint. We have data published in 2017 by scientists at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission that analyzed how well connected the protected area state is within ecoregions globally. This is a data set that was directly created and produced to report on Aichi Biodiversity Target number 11. For those working with this is sometimes called a protected connected data set. So let's move on to a few of the key biodiversity data layers, both in the marine and terrestrial realms. We of course include the terrestrial ecoregions of the world, and note that this is the update that was produced in 2017. And this is again one of those key data sets that is related to specific Aichi Biodiversity Target protection commitments. We also include IUCN and red list species range polygons, as well as several derived products from those, including species richness, which you see in the slide here, threatened species richness, as well as metrics on range rarity, which are based on measures of species endemism. Next slide, please. We have data on globally defined wilderness areas, both on land and sea. You'll see on the left-hand slide there, that's the marine areas, marine wilderness areas in the marine realm that was just published a few weeks ago, picking up quite a lot of media attention, even in some rather esoteric, non-ecological journals, such as The Economist, for example. And there's a recognition that wilderness is being recognized as a conservation target in itself and deserves more attention. So in the marine space, we have data on species richness, range rarity, proportional range rarity that have been extracted from aquamaps. And now aquamaps, for those that are unfamiliar with, is a tool to generate large-scale predictions of natural occurrences of marine species. It's generally accepted that it provides and can produce distribution models for a larger number of species than the IUCN data incorporates. For example, the maps that we're showing here on the right-hand side are derived from around approximately 25,000 different marine species. So let's move on to a snapshot of the available data on threats to biodiversity. First, we have the Biodiversity Intactness Index. The Biodiversity Intactness Index shows the modeled average abundance of originally present species within a grid cell as a percentage relative to their abundance in that ecosystem if it were to be an intact ecosystem. It can be kind of seen as a measure of how humans have impacted on terrestrial biodiversity, pardon me, or as a measure of how degraded biodiversity is in an area. We also have data on the cumulative human impact on terrestrial ecosystems, sometimes just called the human footprint, pardon me again, along with changes of the human footprint from 1993. So it's winter here in Brisbane and we're all getting cold, so I do apologize. An updated version of the human footprint is going to be available in the near future. We're just waiting for that to finish its approval through the peer review process. Next slide. In the marine realm, we also have data on the cumulative change of human impacts. That's essentially the human footprint of the sea. We also have direct data on shipping pollution, runoff plumes, and other stressors in the marine environment. And finally, let's talk a little bit about what we're calling SDG data on the UN Biodiversity Lab. This is data that not only supports your commitments to the CBD, but also shows the connections between the CBD and the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And so a key component of the SDG data are socioeconomic data. And so we have many socioeconomic data layers in the UN Biodiversity Lab platform right now, ranging from human populations predictions on urban expansion, livestock densities, agricultural suitability and change, and this data layer here is showing access or travel time to cities in 2015. So this data set's a little bit different. It was created as part of a program and a project to map human access to healthcare, and doing that, it can actually help identify at-risk populations. But it also has usefulness for mapping risk to resources. For example, where easy access to protected areas might have impacts upon management effectiveness. Apologies again. So also important for drawing conclusions to the SDGs are assessments of ecosystem services, such as carbon storage, sequestration. So we include several recently available data sets on carbon, including above ground forest biomass, which is shown here. We have layers on soil carbon, both globally and specifically within mangrove forests, as well as changes in carbon biomass. I want to emphasize that the data sets I've shown here are only a sample of those available on the UN Biodiversity Lab, and we are working with data creators to incorporate more data in the near future. And we're happy to walk you through the other data sets and show you how they can be used for the 6NR and NBSAP implementation. Just contact us. Access to this data is the first step. It's how we use it that's most important. So the UN Biodiversity Lab was created to support you to use these data to complete the analyses needed to visualize and understand national progress to report on the 5 ABTs for which spatial data is available and essential. So these include Aichi target number 5, which is related to reducing rates of habitat loss, fragmentation, and degradation. Aichi target 11 is meeting protected area coverage commitments, representation, and connectivity targets. ABT 12 related to preventing extinction of threatened species. Aichi target 14 is related to safeguarding and restoring important ecosystem services. And Aichi target 15 is about enhancing and restoring climate resilience into ecosystems. So you can use this platform to create status maps to demonstrate your party's progress on these 5 Aichi targets for your 6th national report, as well as to produce maps that can help inform decisions and actions to be taken in your NBSAP implementation and future conservation planning efforts. So let's look first at analyses that enable you to produce status maps that demonstrate your party's progress on these 5 ABTs. So several status maps can be produced using single data sources in the UN Biodiversity Lab, with aerial calculations and extraction of attribute values being done with just a few clicks of the mouse. On the following slides, we're going to be going through some examples of the maps you can produce in UN Biodiversity Lab with little to no effort required. Next slide, I think. So for example, to report on Aichi target 11, if we want to know the current coverage and distribution of terrestrial protected areas, we can turn on the WDPA ladders. Those are the protected areas coverage. We can look at Ramsar sites, for example. We can extract areas from those. We can calculate areas from those directly. We can also break that down upon IUCN category if we like, or designation date. Next slide, please. Again, related to Aichi target 11, we can also report the exact same thing, the current coverage and distribution of marine protected areas. So for example, in Palau, approximately 82% of their marine area is protected. So data that might be important for that would be, again, the WDPA, as well as the exclusive economic zone data. Apologies for this cough, it's not too much fun. Aichi target 11, the next slide is we can ask ourselves what's the protection coverage of species richness data? So here we might be using data from the IUCN on species richness or threatened species richness or range rarity, as well as the coverage of those with protected areas from the WDPA. Next slide. And again, on Aichi target 11, what is the protection coverage of key connectivity areas within the landscape? For these, you might be looking again at the WDPA as well as the protected connected data set that I mentioned earlier. Go to the next slide. Also, I want to know about the status and distribution of protected area management effectiveness. So you can see in the map here, we have the human pressures in protected area data spread across Mexico. You can see that there's a WDPA data in there, and you can kind of see the range of where human pressures are highest within protected areas. Next slide. So for Aichi target 12, we can ask, what's the special coverage of threatened species within the effective protected areas network? So again, here we might be looking at the human pressures in protected areas data. We might be looking at threatened species richness or just species richness, or again, range rarity. We also have IUCN green list data in here, and that's a IUCN program to identify those protected areas that have the best practice management going on within them. So again, this is just a snapshot of some of the readily producible maps in the UN Biodiversity Lab that indicate the status of progress towards the ABTs. So we're going to be providing you with training on how to create these status maps for your own country in technical webinars from the 13th of September. So next slide. So how do we go from maps showing the current state of our conservation assets to maps that can help inform decision makers to take action? So we use knowledge essentially to tell us where we are, to tell us where we want to go, or where we hope to be, or where we've committed to be. We use the information we know of where we are to identify gaps and the shortcomings in our progress towards reaching those conservation targets. And then we use those to define actions to address those shortcomings. So one of my mentors, a man named Hugh Possingham, who's now the chief scientist at the Nature Conservancy, likes to quip frequently that conservation is largely about protecting areas equitably that represent all habitats and species, while annoying as few people as possible. That is essentially our game. And there's an entire field of scientific research called decision science that aims to provide methods to guide those decision-making processes. Some of you may be familiar with some of those tools, things such as Marxan, zonation, simple cost-benefit analyses, and so on. Behind every possible action, there needs to be a clearly defined aim or target. There's a big difference between simply saying our goal is to protect threatened habitat, which is somewhat ambiguous, to a goal that says we hope to attain 17% protection of all habitats. That's a target we can aim at, and that's what the ABTs are actually doing for us. So we want to get there with integration and development of some of these more advanced tools into the UN Biodiversity Lab platform. Here I'm talking about Marxan or similar programs. But the methods that they teach us are equally important. So in many cases, decision-making is simply a follow-on from maps that might be reporting on the status of a particular ABT target. For example, if we have 5 ecoregions in your country that have met their 17% protection targets, but we have 5% protection in 3 other regions, then the action will be to identify how to increase protection for those 3 ecoregions. Similarly, if we aim to prevent the extinction of a critically threatened species, we found that only 5% of its range is protected, then the actionable map would be to identify areas to increase protection of that species range, which for some very range-restricted species, this may require protecting the entirety of its range. So ultimately, not every country is going to have the exact same needs that they need to take. They're not going to have the exact same maps that they need to be producing. And in general, maps that assist in decision-making will require overlaying several relevant data layers that cover and account for both benefits of conservation and costs for implementing conservation. And this is true within the UN Biodiversity Lab platform as well. So on the slide here, you can see a list of key maps that the UN Biodiversity Lab can assist you in making to help inform your conservation actions. And I assure you that this is not an exhaustive list. So we'll be showing you how to create many of these maps in the technical webinars on 18th of September, but for now I'll show you examples of just 5 of them. So many of these examples can be produced in under 10 minutes on the platform. Others will take a little bit more effort, and some require some external GIS skills, but just to reaffirm, we are here to assist you. Please don't hesitate to contact us. And these examples can be applied to your NBSAP strategies and actions around the world. I also need to note that these are just examples that we developed internally here within our team, and they're for exploratory purposes only. For any country, we can help you evaluate your NBSAPs, and we can create maps that track your progress similar to those that I'm about to show. So here, this first map shows the UN Biodiversity Lab, how it can help you visualize your progress you're making towards achieving Aichi target number 5, reducing habitat loss. So for example, in Eritrea, their NBSAP has an action related to identifying and prioritizing critically threatened habitats. We can assess progress to achieve this NBSAP action by looking at efforts to protect the habitats of critically threatened species. In this case, Ectus africanus, it's the wild African donkey. So from these analyses, we can learn that approximately 14% of the species range in Eritrea is protected. You can see that the northern range is very well protected, but the southern range has no protection whatsoever. So you can include these types of data in these maps in your national reports. And you can also use them to develop more specific measures to protect the species during NBSAP implementation. And you can use similar approaches to help identify and prioritize critical habitats for sets of endangered species anywhere around the globe. The second map shows how the UN Biodiversity Lab can help you visualize the progress you're making to achieve Aichi Target 11 on protected area protection commitments. In Afghanistan, for example, their NBSAP has actions related to finalizing a protected area system for the entire country, ensuring that it protects areas of high biodiversity in all major ecoregions and includes transboundary areas. We can assess the progress on this NBSAP by overlapping the ecoregions and protected areas layers for Afghanistan. For example, in the map we're showing here, we've calculated that only one of Afghanistan's ecoregions, the northwestern Himalayan alpine shrub and meadows ecoregion, has more than a 17% protected coverage. At the other extreme, 7 out of the 16 ecoregions present in Afghanistan have less than 1% coverage. So using this type of information, again, anywhere around the globe, you could then work with the team to design strategies for these underrepresented ecoregions and incorporating them into your protected area network. The third map shows how the UN Biodiversity Lab can help you visualize the progress you're making to achieve Aichi Target 12, preventing extinctions and preserving species. For example, in Timor-Leste, their NBSAP action relates to identifying and developing protection programs for endangered species across all ecosystems, forests, mountains, and then wetlands, coastal marine areas, even agricultural lands. So we can use the UN Biodiversity Lab to assess the progress on this action by looking at the protected area coverage for the habitats of several threatened species. For example, here we're looking at particularly mangroves and coral reefs, and we can measure that around 46% of Timor-Leste's mangroves are within protected areas. And equally 51% of the country's coral reefs are protected by marine protected areas. So anywhere around the world, you can use this type of information to prioritize areas where conservation interventions to protect habitat can help reduce the risk of extinction for that species that depend on that habitat for their survival. Next slide, please. Our fourth map shows how the UN Biodiversity Lab can help you visualize progress you're making towards Aichi Target 14, protecting and restoring ecosystem services. Tanzania has NBSAP actions related to developing, strengthening, and implementing watershed management programs. Using the UN Biodiversity Lab, we can identify some of those key watersheds. We can identify supply areas. And as mentioned before, we can identify areas where forest cover has changed in those surrounding areas important for watershed provisioning. So you can use these data to prioritize areas for protection and restoration to help maintain these valuable ecosystem services. Our last map, next slide please. Our last map shows how the UN Biodiversity Lab can help you visualize the progress you're making to achieve Aichi Target 15, climate resilience. For example, here, the Dominican Republic has an NBSAP action related to collecting and analyzing data on the contributions of carbon sequestration programs to climate resilience and mapping the key ecosystems that have potential for carbon sequestration. So using the UN Biodiversity Lab, we can estimate and we can calculate the number of tons per hectare of carbon within the country's protected areas and outside of them. And we can use this data to highlight the value of protected areas beyond simple biodiversity conservation. As well as we can use it to select complementary protected areas that contribute to mitigation strategies. So as you've seen here, there are many different examples of how analyses in the UN Biodiversity Lab can help to inform NBSAP implementation, achievement of the ABTs, and development of your 6th national report. So our team at UNDP, the UN Environment, and the CBD are here to support you to use this tool to create high-quality, data-driven national reports. Our spatial data and technical specialists speak English, French, and Spanish, and we can and are happy to help give you a tour of the UN Biodiversity Lab, identify key maps and analyses that you can produce within your country, and show you how to upload existing national level data to your platform. From September through December of this year, we will be offering additional webinars to train you on the use of these tools. We also offer one-on-one technical support with our spatial specialists, including myself and others, and 6NR specialists. Online working groups through the NBSAP forum are also available to help you complete these analyses for your 6NR. And again, at each event, you can ask the experts any question you have and learn from your peers. So before we move on to the first Q&A session, I just want to take the chance to introduce you as the UN Biodiversity Lab users to your key focal points as you begin to use this platform. For any technical issues related to the usage of the UN Biodiversity Lab, you can write to the email address shown on the screen. We're going to try our best to commit to answering your questions within 24 hours. With support with spatial data and analyses, you can contact the spatial planner, that's me, at the email address listed here. And for support related to the 6NR, the focal UNDP, UN Environment countries are listed on the slide. So the UN Biodiversity Lab can help your country and the global community to create a baseline against which we can measure progress. So if we don't know where we are now, it's very hard to measure successes, failures, and to identify areas where we can improve. So we look forward to working with you to explore how the UN Biodiversity Lab can support your 6NR and future conservation planning. Cheers.
Thank you. Many thanks to Chrissy, Annie, and Scott for your presentations on the importance of spatial data for nature and development and on the UN Biodiversity Lab. They provided a great overview of why the UN Biodiversity Lab was created and how it can help policymakers to plan and report for conservation and sustainable development. Now I would like to invite our webinar attendees to share their questions and comments in the question box, or I think we can take advantage that we have a core group here and give you the option to open their microphones and see if they have a question for our panelists. So I'm just going to unmute your microphones in order, starting with Gabriel, in case you have a questions for our panelists. So we can hear you, Gabriel. Over to you.
Thank you. No, it's been a very informative presentation. Congratulations for all this magnificent work. Just a question related to the use of the tool itself. How can you subscribe to it and manage all these data sets? Is it directly on the web page? Is it a complicated process? Do you need a special sort of permission to do that? How does it work?
Thanks for your question. Over to you, Scott, Annie, or Chrissy.
Sure, just let me unmute myself there real quick. So for each country, there is a focal point administrator for access to your project within the UN Biodiversity Lab. If you haven't been in contact with UNDP yet, then we will need to be getting in touch to pass on your contact details to our developers to provide you with the administration access to the platform itself. And then from there, you're able to provide access to other members that you want to have access to the site itself. They won't have the same administrative rights as you do, but they will be able to work within the platform and do things as well. And in terms of getting data into it, once you are set up on the platform, you can start uploading your data anytime you want. There are a few key things to remember about that. The formats of the data that it requires to go into, as well as the projection information. And those are things that we're happy to help you out with. If you have further questions, and I'm happy to help clarify about that. It can take a little bit of time now, so I don't want to talk everyone's ear off. But if you do have further questions about that particularly, please let me know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Just to jump in with a little bit of additional clarification about that, it will be the UNDP or UN Environment 6NR focal point who's assigned as the administrator for the national projects. So that person should have received an email within the last week, and they can contact our support team if they have not received it. If you're not the 6NR focal point, you can click on the My Projects button. That will be, it's on the top right of the homepage, and you'll see all of the different national projects that are available, and can request to join the one for your country. And then the administrator will be able to give you access to it. If you're not associated with the 6NR project at all, you're welcome to use all of the global data layers that are available through UN Biodiversity World.
Thank you, Scott and Annie. I would like to pass now the microphone to Ian in case you have a question to make. So let me unmute your microphone. Yeah, could you help me to unmute Ian's microphone?
Yes, actually it's on mute, but he has it muted, so
okay.
It's up to Ian too. But I think Gabriel has a question in the tab, in the questions tab.
That was my fault, I guess. It seemed like it got double muted.
Okay, please go ahead, Ian.
Yeah, so I had a couple of questions. I mean, I've been on and off the website several times and looked at some of these things, and some of the stuff you presented, well, actually all the maps you presented today, Scott, still have this issue with respect to the capacity, or at least the online capacity, to measure proportional area with overlays, which I don't think has been built in yet, or have you managed to get there?
I'm sorry, Scott. You are having some troubles with the audio. Can you repeat it or be more close to the microphone, please?
Yeah. If it's not the audio, it's my voice giving out, isn't it?
It's working.
You're perfect now.
No, so yeah, that's a good question again, Ian. At present, the spatial overlap tools are still in development. We have estimates from the developers that this should be done by the fourth quarter of this year, which is what, September, October. So it's something that should be done very soon. And we are aware that as it's not done, we need to be providing extra support for countries that may be needing assistance with that. So we do have the capacity, the spatial capacity, and the time as well to assist countries while that tool is being finalized and put into production. So
yeah, okay, yes. Thanks. The issue for me is I'm not in Myanmar, and I know there is a GIS group there in the Forest Department, but whether they've accessed this tool or not, I don't know. I certainly made it available to them or let them know it was there. The other question I had was with respect to species distribution data. So there is an IUCN database for species distributions. I don't know how accurate it is, but at least it gives us some idea. Have you managed to get that data up yet? Because I do know that the data set exists.
Are you talking about the actual red list polygons themselves?
Yes.
Probably. Yeah, so that's we're actually
Again, Scott, can you please come closer to the microphone?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Internet in Australia not very good sometimes, I must say. Yes, so we are actually in the process of finalizing that data sharing agreement with the IUCN to get the access to the actual polygons themselves and not just the derived products, which I showed some of them before. This, for some reason, is becoming a bit of it's a more drawn out process than anybody expected it to be. But we do hope to be able to have those within the platform within the next few weeks. If assuming the meeting that is happening either this morning or this afternoon goes well. So hopefully within the next few weeks, they should be available within the platform.
Okay, that's really good news. Thanks. Okay, I'll pass it on to others.
Thank you, Ian. I would like to pass the microphone to Leonardo, so every one of you can have the chance of asking questions to our panelists. So Leonardo, it's over to you.
Martin, I think Leonardo is having some problems with his mic, so there's actually a question in the question box.
Yes, I can read that.
Okay, perfect.
So it says, thanks for the presentation. Till now, I heard talk to you about spatial data mainly. I work with species occurrence data with GBIF network, observations, biological collections, data, etc. Did you consider this type of data in UN Biodiversity Lab? Over to you, Chrissy, and Annie and Scott.
Thanks for the question, Leonardo. Can you clarify what exactly you're referring to in terms of working in some of those species distribution models versus species distribution models from, say, the IUCN type things?
I think we
have to read that one off, Martin. Yeah.
Just have to let him to write some clarifications. Meanwhile, is there any comment you would like to do referring to the GBIF and the UN Biodiversity Lab?
So I would say we have been in touch with some of the groups from GBIF. We haven't purposely been looking at using any of their species distribution modeling efforts, but again, if that's something that users and countries think would provide extra benefit and extra value, then those are things that we will happily and readily follow up. And it's something that I can look into myself to see about the possibility of working with them more closely.
Thank you, Scott. Lydia, would you like to add something or to ask something? I think your microphone is open, Lydia, in case you would like to, in case you have some question to do. Okay. Well, thanks to everyone who contributed to the discussion. As we enter to the second half of this webinar, I would like to focus in more detail on how the UN Biodiversity Lab can support you to produce your 6NR and to support implementation of the Convention on Biological Diversity. To support you to do this, Scott Atkinson, UNDP Special Planner for the 6NR project, will introduce you to your national projects within the UN Biodiversity Lab and show and show you how you can customize them to support the development of your 6NR. The second hour will again conclude with a Q&A session. Over to you, Scott.
All right, thanks, Martin. I think everyone's going to get tired of my raspy voice by the end of this, so I apologize. So hi again, everyone. And in this final presentation, I'm just going to be giving you an introduction to how to access your national projects on the UN Biodiversity Lab, how to control access, and how to perform some of the basic functions. It's going to be a presentation presented in a series of GIFs or GIFs, I never know how to say that word correctly, or animated images, all of which will be available for download as a PowerPoint presentation after the webinar. So the first thing is logging in. So we're going to start with the basics of registering and logging in on the UN Biodiversity Lab. You can see in this slide, this is the homepage for the UN Biodiversity Lab, accessible at www.unbiodiversitylab.org. And please note that when you access the site from Macs or devices running iOS, you may be experiencing bugs at present with some of the browsers, Chrome and Firefox. And we do recommend using Safari if you are on a Mac while we figure out what is causing this and find a solution to it. For Windows users, there is no preferred browser. The only requirement is that it's an HTML5 supported browser, which means any modern browser, including Microsoft Edge, Chrome, or Firefox should work well. For people that use other operating systems, such as Linux or something, it's more hit or miss, but we're used to that. And it does seem to work pretty well on most platforms from my experience. So to register or log in for the UN Biodiversity Lab, you're going to click on, is it going to go up? You're going to click on this button that will ask you to enter your email. There you go. So if you're an administrator, you just enter your email address that you have associated with your project, and you will be emailed a one-time use code. So to keep your information secure, we always log into the UN Biodiversity Lab using this randomly generated one-time code. So you should receive that email straight away from the MapX bot. And if you don't receive it within a few minutes, you should check your spam folders of your email. Sometimes they get caught up in there. You take that code and simply copy and paste it into the website, and it will instantly log you in officially. So each time you enter the platform, you can click the icon to see if you are still logged in. There you go, there's the code, copy paste it in there. Like I said, every time you enter the platform, you can click on the icon to see if you're still logged in to your user account. You may need to re-enter your email and generate a unique login. Normally, that's not going to be the case. Your browser will remember you from previously. Sometimes if you go onto a new internet network, for example, you might have to log back in. It might log you out. But be sure that you always provide the same email in order to access your projects, because this is the email that you're going to be registered with. So accessing a private national project. So now that you know how to log in, we're going to show you how to access your private national workspace or your project within the UN Biodiversity Lab. You navigate over to the top right corner, there's a box that says My Projects. When you click on My Projects, you're directed to a list of projects, and within the UN Biodiversity Lab, and any project you're a member with will show up at the top of this list. There we go. If you're not associated with anything with the 6NR, you can still use several functions within the UN Biodiversity Lab, including downloading source data and generating maps. But note that at this time, we're only able to offer the national project features to teams associated with the 6 national reporting process. If you are working on the 6NR, we've already created a national project for you that is pre-populated with relevant data layers. So for ease, the UNDP or UN Environment 6NR focal point for each country has automatically been designated as the national project administrator. Like I said previously in the question and answer session, if that hasn't been the case, then please contact either the UNDP or your UN Environment focal point. And if you are the UNDP, UN Environment 6NR focal point for your country and have not gotten access, like I just said, please contact us. If you're working in your country's 6NR but are not the focal point, you can easily join your national project. You still search through projects simply by typing in the name of the country and requesting to join them. And this will send an email off to the administrator of the project, and they can then affirm your access to it. So it's important to consider who on your team should be on the project, particularly the administrator, because that's the person that will have all the privileges of controlling everything. So who should be a project administrator? Every national project needs to have one assigned administrator. The administrator maintains access rights to the project and is responsible for both providing access to other users and delegating the roles of those users within the project. The administrator should probably or preferably have some basic working knowledge and understanding of geographical information systems, software, or spatial data in general, but they don't need to be a GIS expert by any means. They should certainly be competent on a computer, but they don't have to be an expert in GIS. And as noted previously, for the 6NR project, the UNDP UN Environment 6NR focal point has been designated as the administrator for your country's project. And if the 6NR is not the best person to be the administrator of your project, don't worry, we can add another member to your team as an administrator as well. So if you need help in identifying the best administrator for your project, please contact us at the email provided there after this webinar, and we can give you some advice about how to deal with this. So the roles and responsibilities of the administrator. The administrator is the manager of the project. Only the administrator can decide who is given access to the project and what those users can do within their project. For example, some users might be only allowed to view data in the projects, while others might be allowed to upload data and carry out analyses. And the administrator alone can decide to invite external users to the project or to remove them from the project. It's a lot of power and responsibility. So aside from providing the user access rights, the administrator is also in charge of configuring the project. They can modify some of the parameters, such as what's in the abstracts about data, the positioning of the map, and they can also delete projects entirely. Although, don't do that, please. So project configuration, we go on to the next little slide there. To configure a project, you navigate to appropriately name the project configuration tool in the toolbox. And here you can see the description and the initial position of the map for your project. We ask that you please do not change your project title, as it's essential that it stays the same to ensure that you can easily access it within the UN Biodiversity Lab. At the bottom of this window, there's a little checkbox, which denotes whether your project will be public or not. And if your project is public, it can be searched in the list of projects, and other users can ask to become members of it. However, if you don't want your project to be in the public space and you want it to remain private, leave this box unchecked. However, you have to remember that within a public project, you can publish data that will only be visible to the members of the project, unless you specifically state that the data can be read by public users. If you have extra questions about some of these public-private issues, please contact us, and we can clarify some of those things. So receiving and accepting invites from your team. So to invite people to collaborate on your project, you can select the invite a new member button. You enter the emails of people like you would that you would like to extend that invitation to, and they will receive the link immediately. As people can ask to become a member of a project, the administrator can receive requests of membership by email. So you have to check if the person can be granted access to your project, and if so, accept the request by clicking on the link in the email you have received. And if you receive an invite to a project, the link will direct you back to MapX, the UN Biodiversity Lab. To access your project within the UN Biodiversity Lab, you just simply navigate back to the My Projects link on the platform. So setting user roles and permissions. Earlier, I mentioned that users can have different roles inside the project. You can define the roles of each project member on a define roles drop down, yeah. Only administrators can define the role of other members. So members can include everyone in your project that you want to be able to see and use the data. Members with a publisher privilege can publish data layers, can publish source data layers and views for all other members, and can edit views that are available for publisher privileges. Administrators have the same authority as a publisher and can also change the status of other accounts and delete their project entirely again. Again, probably you don't want to do this. And if you're interested in contributing data to be published for use in a lab, we again would love to hear from you. So please follow the link on the FAQs on the website to submit our data submission form, or contact us directly at support@unbiodiversitylab.org. So now we're going to go to the National Workspace. So congratulations, you now know the basics of managing your project on the UN Biodiversity Lab. And once you have your project, you're probably going to want to know a little bit about the types of data that you can add and the tools you can access. So in UN Biodiversity Lab, there are 3 basic data types. There's raster data, there's vector data, and there are indicators. So the UN Biodiversity Lab itself, the maps handle 2 types of spatial data, vector data and raster data. You can broadly think of vector data as data that represents linear or aerial features on a map, such as highways, which would be lines, cities that would be a point, or species range maps, which would be polygons. Vector data is normally going to contain not just feature on a map, but we'll also have other data associated with it called attribute data. Attributes can be many things, such as place names, the area of a feature, if it's a polygon, or other values calculated or derived from that data that are associated with it as a feature. For example, each feature in the Ecoregions 2017 dataset in UN Biodiversity Lab has an attribute for that feature's ecoregion name, which is a finer scale, the finest scale land ecological classification within that data set. But within each one of those as well, there's an attribute for its biome name, which is a more generalized ecological classification. So if we go to raster data, raster data is broadly thought of as data that represents things that exist on a range of values across space, such as a map of temperature, land cover, population density, or the percent of canopy closure in a forest. The attribute of raster data is a value within a pixel or a grid cell and represents and it can also represent categorical values, things like a land cover class, or continuous values such as elevation. One way to think about raster data for people that aren't familiar with it is to think about it as a photograph. When you take a picture on your phone or on your camera, you are taking an image that's made up of lots of little pixels. And each one of those pixels has a value that tells it what color that's supposed to be, what brightness that is supposed to be. So it's a similar way that rasters treat data. They are effectively a snapshot made up of pixels, each with unique values within them. So within the UN Biodiversity Lab, one thing to note is that if a data set or a data view, it has a purple button, that means it's a raster data set. If it has a green button, it means it's a vector data set. So red buttons in the panel on the left indicate a data set that is being accessed in the UN Biodiversity Lab from another external web-hosted spatial database. In this case, the WDPA World Database on Protected Areas, which you can also access from protectedplanet.net. So some of the key tools and functions within UN Biodiversity Lab, we're going to explore a few of those now. So data sets, as previously mentioned, are organized thematically in the UN Biodiversity Lab, and that's done so in 2 ways: by relevance reporting on the Aichi Biodiversity Targets, and by a general theme of the dataset. The general themes available include biodiversity, climate and carbon, ecosystem services, human impact, land cover, marine, natural hazards, protected areas, restoration, and socioeconomic. The ABT targets mentioned include ABTs 5, 11, 12, 14, and 15. So just to know, we've assigned themes to these based on our best judgment of a dataset's primary context among the themes mentioned above. You may find that datasets that may help you in reporting in different ways that we have tagged them. And in fact, we actually hope that you find novel uses for these that can assist you in international reporting. And we encourage you to look beyond just the ABTs when you're searching for datasets, but also to explore other thematic areas that may help provide you create better stories and better analyses. So to activate a dataset, you turn on a particular theme or target of your choice by clicking on the associated switch in the left panel. You will then see a list of views that are related to that theme or target. And you click the button beside it to activate that view. There we go. Just turned on a dataset for the last of the wilds. So to view the map in full screen, you can experiment with clicking all these buttons. And there are several methods to filter your views or search for a particular dataset. You can order the selected views by title or date, or search by a keyword. Clicking on the Filter Activated Views buttons will remove all the views except those that you currently have turned on. You can also filter, there's also several different methods to filter views. You can order the selected views. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. You can also click on views to filter by component, meaning the type of view, the class of the view, the meaning of the keyword, or the data collection. Here we go. For example, you could turn something on for biodiversity. And those are all based upon the tags of the keywords that each data source is associated with. So to look at views in a certain order, we can use these arrows in the view toolbar located beneath the legend in each view. You click on Filter Activated Views for simplicity, so that only the views we have currently selected are available in the legend. The arrows will move up or down according to your selection. So populating your projects. To conduct analyses within your project, you first need to add data. For the 6NR National Project, we've already done this for you. Your workspace will contain upwards of 50 different data sets, including the WDPA, the human footprint, the IUCN Red List species range data. Again, as mentioned earlier, that's one that we hope to have within the next few weeks working within the platform. There are various data sets on carbon. We have global forest data. We have data from the Alliance for Zero Extinction, ecoregions, various socioeconomic data, and others. Although please note that not all data may be pre-populated in your country, as not all data covers all countries. For example, mangrove data does not exist in Kyrgyzstan, for example. So to delete unnecessary external views from your project, navigate back to the toolbox. There are several items in here which we'll cover in further detail in the webinar on September 13th on uploading and working with national datasets. Today we'll just show you how to review views that you do not want in your project. And click on Manage External Views. We'll find the title of the view you would like to remove and click on the small X, and this will remove it from your workspace. If you accidentally delete an external view that you would still like in your workspace, you can easily re-add it by finding the view in the main data catalog and clicking the Share button beneath the view. Enter the name of the project here. It should automatically appear underneath the input. When you click the add the view to selected projects button, a save icon will appear, signifying that it is now available in your project. So sharing views and collections. In addition to adding data to your project, you can also share certain views and collections with colleagues. Collections refer to predefined themes that the view is part of, for example, the Aichi target, or the theme that you select. And you can choose to either generate a direct link or to embed the view or collection in a website or a blog. Note that if you're trying to share a view from a private project to someone who has not been added as a member of your project, it will not be visible to them. Downloading spatial data for use in a desktop GIS of your choice. You can download data that were published in vector format from the UN Biodiversity Lab for use in your own GIS platform, for example, ArcGIS or QGIS or OpenJump, Grass. Those are just a few. You can download data in several different formats to use in your own programs, notably Esri shapefiles, GeoPackages, GeoJSONs, KMLs. And when you download data, you have the option to download only a subset of the data that intersects with your country. The downloader file will automatically select all the features contained or touching the borders of that country at your choice. So as of now, creating a true clip or a spatial intersection of the data within your country's borders cannot be done within the UN Biodiversity Lab and requires its use in an external program, again, such as ArcGIS or QGIS, OpenJump, or some of the command line tools. If you need assistance with simplifying this process, don't hesitate to ask us, as there are some ways to do this in batch format. Please contact us with the support at the support email addresses. And again, please note that not all views are available for download. Some of the data sets that we are able to show you are protected under a view-only license from their creator. If that is the case, we will often provide you, we endeavor to provide you with a link to the data so that you can request it individually from them. So our hands are a little bit tied on this. Presently, only vector data can be downloaded, but we are working on providing access to raster data as well for download. That's something probably in the next few months will potentially be implemented. So once you download data, you will receive an email with a link to download a compressed file of your requested data once that view has been exported. And finally, note that you cannot download any data if you're not logged in. So the final element I want to introduce today is how to generate and download a map from UN Biodiversity Lab. So making maps is a critical element of using the UN Biodiversity Lab tool, and it can be done in two ways. There we go. I think I'm a little bit ahead of the slides, at least on my phone. Anyways, the first part of downloading a map is first clicking on the Take a Screenshot button. Will automatically begin a download of a zip file to your computer. And this file will contain 4 elements, PNGs with the scale, map, and legend, and 1 PDF with all of the elements combined. If you cannot see the file at the bottom of your browser, check the Downloads folder in your computer. For example, in Chrome will normally open up a little box at the bottom of your browser telling you where the file is. If you're in Firefox, it'll be a little bit different. It will be in a tab up in the upper right. So the PDF will look like this. So the visual elements of all of this are still in development. So if the output is not to your liking, we recommend arranging the elements yourself. So to do so, you can use a program such as PowerPoint to arrange the elements for inclusion into reports of publications. That was pretty enough. If you would simply like to take a screenshot of the view with no auxiliary information, you can click this print button along the top of the toolbar. It will automatically download a picture of just what is shown on the screen. So today, we've just gone through a brief overview to get you started on the UN Biodiversity Lab, but there's still a lot to learn for sure. So Please be sure to join us in our webinars coming up in September on uploading and analyzing national data for your 6NR and using that data to help make conservation decisions.
Thank you, Scott, for your presentation. Provided a really concrete picture of how parties can begin to use the UN Biodiversity Lab for preparation of their 6NR. Now I would like to, again to invite our webinar attendees to share their questions and comments in the question box, or now we can do a second round of opening your microphone so you can ask questions directly to our panelists. So if you agree, we can start again with Gabriel, then Ian. I can read what Leonardo is typing, and if Lydia has some points to raise, we'll also open your mic. So starting with Gabriel again.
Thanks, Martin. I just saw in the question box that Gabriel said no questions from his side, so maybe we can move on to Ian.
Thank you, Annie. Ian, do you have something to add?
No, not really. I've gone through it, and I think I've understood most of the stuff. I'm just, as I say, I'm most anxious or most interested in getting the capacity to do proportional representation with overlays. I mean, that's really where the value of the thing comes in. If we can't get it, I think you'll be getting a lot of requests there, Scott.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay, thank you. Leonardo, do you have something? Or Lydia? Okay. So if not, I would like to thank everyone who's participated in this second discussion. And to close this webinar, I would like to turn the microphone over to Annie for a few final comments.
Great, thanks, Martin. So as we wrap up, I'd just like to thank everyone who attended this session on behalf of the 6NR teams from UNDP and UN Environment. And we look forward to continued engagement with you as you begin to access and use the UN Biodiversity Lab to support the preparation of your 6NR. I'd like to draw your attention to several key resources that can support you to begin to access and use the UN Biodiversity Lab. So they're displayed on this slide in the background here, and we'll also be sharing this with you after the webinar for reference. So first of all, we've produced an overall brochure that's available in English, French, and Spanish, detailing the services of UN Biodiversity Lab. We also have a briefing note for parties to the CBD that spells out in a little bit more detail how the UN Biodiversity Lab can support the preparation of the 6NR and NBSAP implementation. Scott is working to produce a technical guidance on the various types of status maps and decision-making maps that can be included in the 6NR and help to guide NBSAP implementation. This will be released in combination with the technical webinars in September. So we'll be very happy to share that with you then, also in English, French, and Spanish. And finally, there's a detailed FAQs section on the UN Biodiversity Lab that should provide some of the basic answers to your questions for navigation of the site. We'll also be releasing a walkthrough showing some of the similar features that were in the third presentation today about how to do basic functions on the UN Biodiversity Lab. And finally, we encourage you to join our 3 in-depth technical trainings offered during September. With your registration for this webinar, you are automatically registered for these additional training webinars, and you should receive an invitation in your email inbox the day of the webinar with the link to join the webinar. So just to recap, I know we've told you several times what these webinars are, but on Thursday, September 13th, we'll show you how to upload and work with national data sets in your national project on UN Biodiversity Lab. On Tuesday, September 18th, we'll show you how to use spatial data and maps to make conservation decisions. And finally, on Tuesday, October 2nd, we'll show you how to use story maps to communicate the value of biodiversity. So this is the first of many trainings, but we expect that the success of UN Biodiversity Lab will be based on continued dialogue with you, the end users, as we work to develop its capacities and its ability to serve your needs. So we look forward to building this relationship with you. And with that, over to Martin to conclude the webinar.
Thank you, Annie. And thanks to all our attendees for joining us today. We will post this webinar recording on the NBSAP Forum YouTube channel and all of the presentations on the NBSAP Forum. You will receive an email with links to the recording, presentations, and resources that Annie just mentioned. We hope you all enjoyed this session. Have a nice day or evening. We look forward to your active engagement in the Biodiversity Lab. Thank you all, and this concludes the webinar.